This is Jim Murphy at Grow Forward. Today we're going to try something a little different. If you've watched any of our videos, you've watched me interview somebody or talk to somebody about a particular subject matter that they're experts in. Today we're just going to talk to and with a group of students from Loyola University. They're in the environmental science department. Many of them have opinions on environmental issues, food issues, sustainability issues, air quality issues, energy issues. These are all things that we touched on with some other people in some of our interviews. So today we're going to have a little discussion with them about it. Trying to emphasize the quality of the work that some of our companies are doing, but a belief in the market system in improving not only the environment, but the quality of life of people here in Chicago. So we're going to give it the best we can. I know they're all pretty smart, and I'm looking forward to it. So let's get it rolling. I came down and worked in the markets at the Board of Trade for 25 years. It worked out for me. Timing was good. Timing in life is always very important. And I morphed over into energy and food and in 05, 06. And I've been in this space since then. My original first step into this marketplace was to become a member of the Chicago Climate Exchange, because I wanted to understand carbon and what was going on in terms of our environment and our atmosphere. I didn't know that much about it. I didn't study this subject in school, but I knew something was going on, and I just couldn't figure out what it was. That was really helpful for me. It introduced me to some renewable energy projects, and I got very much involved in biofuels, which I still am today. I don't pay my bills in the food business. Food business is less profitable than some of the other things I've done, but energy is really good. And so we have a almost 70 million gallon facility east of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And every time you fill up your car, you put some ethanol in the tank. And the ethanol part is the really good part of the fuel. And I can explain, and I'm going to explain a little bit of that to you. The carcinogens in the atmosphere from oil are really, really bad, and really, really bad in the urban areas, okay? And so the lower the octane the fuel is, the more the bad stuff they got in it. And ethanol is a high octane fuel. It's 114 octane. So when you look at this, you go to, well, I want the 88, or I want the 85, or I want the 91. Ethanol is 114. Okay, that's a really clean a way to power up your gas. And it's very clean, because there's no emissions problem with ethanol. We have a vehicle up at our plant in Michigan that we've had for 9 years that has 260,000 miles, and it's only been driven on ethanol, and we've never had to have anything done to it. It just drives, because it's such a clean fuel. It's American grown, American raised. I think that one of the things that I like to talk about, if I'm just going to touch on carbon a little bit, just the most simplistic way of looking at it is, oil is carbon that's been sequestered underground for billions of years. And in the last 100 years, we've taken a lot of that carbon out of the ground, and it powered our economy, it powered the Industrial Revolution. It's been an awesome fuel for a long time, okay? But the carbon's coming out of the ground too fast, and it's affecting our atmosphere and affecting temperatures. It might not sound like a lot, but the ocean temperatures are up, what, a degree and a half Fahrenheit in the last 40 years. That degree and a half is actually a lot. And we better not do another degree and a half, because everybody's going to live in Chicago if we do, because they're not going to live in any coastal area at all, because it'll be terrible. So that carbon comes out so fast. Carbon in ethanol is carbon that comes out of an ear of corn. And guess where the carbon came from? It came from the atmosphere. Because the corn, any plant pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and creates, and that's what the energy is created from. So from that standpoint, ethanol is a renewable in terms of carbon, and it's a very clean fuel. So what did that do for me? And I'm willing to discuss that, and we can have questions. Let me just go through my history, and then we'll talk about any of these subjects. That taught me how to have a partnership with farmers Farmers are great partners. We now have over 600 family farms around our plant that deliver corn to us. They're smaller farms generally than the ones in Iowa or the ones in Illinois. And that gave me the courage to fund these guys to do this local foods and to work with farmers here in Illinois and Michigan and Wisconsin and Indiana. I think that there's a lot to be learned from farmers and what they do with the ground. They are kind of environmentalists, despite some of their practices with commodity crops. I've got an interview coming up with that I've just posted, and we have a long conversation about what are they doing? You know, are they going to continue to throw nitrates on the soil, and they're going to continue to mess up our rivers and continue to mess up the Gulf? No, they're not. Okay, and things are changing, and that's a good thing. They need to change, and they need to put the buffers in to protect the rivers, and they need to use GPS more to identify where they need fertilizers and where they don't. Okay, because there's no reason economically to just spread fertilizer on the ground. They need to go to no-till farming because they're losing a lot of their topsoil. There's no question that's going to happen. I was talking to a guy who has, last week, he's got 30,000 acres in Uruguay, South America, where he farms. He's got a farm. And he said Uruguay is an entire organic country. And everybody does no-till. So think about the value of that soil compared to the value of northern Illinois soil, where they've been tilling and the soil is down 40%. So the farmers have a lot to do. They got a lot of improvement to make, but I think we're seeing it go in that direction. You know, just success and challenges. That's always an interesting subject matter. I think if you believe in the marketplace, you can be successful. If you really think about it, the marketplace rewards people who use their heads and think and reason. You don't have to be a business major to be successful in the marketplace. I think that's something the Jesuits have taught us, that a liberal arts education works. I did not take a business class the whole time I was in college. Okay, I took one business law class, that was it. So you don't need to be a business major to be successful in the markets and business. You just have to believe in free markets. If you think government's going to help you out and get you to where you need to be, good luck. But the markets will reward smart people who work hard. And so that's my first, just if you want to be successful, work hard, use your head, figure it out. And from my personal life, challenges and successes and failures, as a trader and having a trading company, I knew that if I was right 62% of the time, I was one of the best traders around. So if you're only right 62% of the time, guess what? You're wrong 38% of the time. So in business, you got to learn how to be wrong. Okay, and it's kind of like I got a book I give to people for their MBAs, and it's like 90 pages, and there's one little spot where it talks about the successful, but what does a businessman do when he drives down the fork of the road and he comes and he doesn't know whether to go right or left? So he takes a right, and he goes about a half mile down the road, and there's a log over the street, and there's a bunch of water running across the street. What does the businessman do? Well, he says, does he say to himself, you know, I decided to go right, I'm going to go over this log, go through the water, and keep going? No, he doesn't. He backs the car up and goes back to the fork of the road and goes left. So the reason I tell you that analogy is don't be afraid to be wrong, because you'll never be successful if you make a decision and you can't change the decision. That's something that I think is really important. So we're going to talk, what are we going to talk about? You're going to come up and join me? Sure. Come on. Mic up. That's my introduction. So we're going to talk a little bit about environmental stuff, or what are we going to talk about? What do you guys want to talk about? Life, environment, what? Yeah.
I'm curious, Jim, if you could elaborate on the sort of commodity crop farming, and you are hopeful about the change and practices getting better. Where do you think that change comes from? What drives that change?
Well, I think that it would be an easy thing to do with the marketplace if you had a, you know, when we started the climate exchange, we had a cap and trade system, okay? So if you didn't emit carbon, you got a credit, and that credit had an economic value. So how do you incentivize the farmers that actually have the farm on the river to take a half a mile of production out of production, okay? Well, I think it should be a cap. I think it should be a trade thing where all the other farmers have to buy credits, and the guy who actually puts the land, takes the land out of service, receives the credit and gets paid. So why should one farmer have to cover the pollution of all the other farmers? And it's kind of happening that way a little bit. Groups of farmers are getting together, but a lot of the rivers are now being grassed over. I mean, around the rivers are being grassed, and they have to be. They have to come even further. Illinois is probably the biggest problem of any state in the country, as far as that's concerned. Now, up in Michigan, we have a lot of smaller farmers. They're really way more environmentally sensitive. They're family farms, and they kind of live and breathe it. And we don't really have the same kind of river system that Illinois has. Did I answer that question? Kind of?
So maybe a cap and trade system which would be driven by public policy, or how would that be driven by the marketplace?
Good question. In the example of cap and trade for carbon, it was a volunteer system, okay? And people signed up. And if you can get industrial companies to sign up, and you can get American Electric Power to sign up, okay, I think you get farmers to sign up. They're kind of doing it already. I mean, in Illinois, they're kind of starting to do it with their wildlife protection areas and other kind of restoration work they're doing. I mean, they are really quite environmentally sensitive. They just have to make a living in a very tough business. Being a farmer right now, this year, right now, is very difficult. Commodity prices are very low, their inputs are very high, and they're not making the kind of money they were making 5 years ago. So I think that would work. I'm sure there's other solutions, but I do think a lot of the farmers, we have one partner of ours in the greenhouse who's got 5,000 acres in northern Illinois. And he's a little nervous about what's happened to the land. And so I think farmers know.
You talk a lot about carbon and its effects on the environment, and I'm wondering what initiatives have you taken and Local Foods has taken in order to reduce your carbon footprint?
Well, I think transportation of food is the obvious one, right? Because our food comes 72 miles instead of thousands of miles. The carbon footprint is down there. We have a lot of organic farmers, not exclusively organic. We have a lot of people not using nitrate-based fertilizers. I think that if you saw the water usage that we use, certainly at the greenhouse, we're talking about drips instead of tons of water. So water is another issue, uses of water. Not as big an issue here. I don't get all nervous about water usage here because we have so much. But we capture all the rainwater on the roof of our greenhouse, and that's the water we use in the greenhouse. I don't drive a Tesla. I like to put ethanol in my cars, and I happen to actually think electric cars are overrated in what they claim they do, and we'll see. I said that same thing about the diesel cars when they were doing the clean diesel commercials. I thought that was a joke, and it is. It's turned out to be a joke. And diesel cars they're declining quickly because they are the most pollutant, the highest pollutant fuel we have. So I'm now focused on clean coal that powers our Tesla cars. Just imagine next time you see a Tesla, think of the coal plant that's behind it, powering it, because that's all they do is what percentage of our electrical energy off the grid comes from coal? It's pretty high, pretty high. Other questions? No bad questions.
I'm curious how you, as someone that supports a lot of local family farms, feels about the subsidies related to corn for ethanol production that are wiping out a lot of family farms with the push to go big or go home.
So not to trick you up, but could you tell everybody what that subsidy is?
Corn, if you have a failed crop of corn, you're paid for it. It's like there's no, you're secure.
Okay, that's subsidy. Okay, that's a corn subsidy.
Like crop insurance for commodity crops, and then also the renewable portfolio standard, which requires a certain amount of ethanol in our
let's talk
fuel
about both of them.
supply, and kind of then provides an incentive for farmers to choose to farm corn as opposed to other things that they might farm.
So prior to ethanol, there was a huge subsidy in corn, okay? Because the price of corn was so low. And the federal government would buy billions of bushels of corn, and they would ship it overseas, and they would send it to poor countries, okay? They would feed the poor. And consequently, there was never any farm systems in poor countries because they got free corn from America. Okay, once ethanol came around, those subsidies went away because the price of corn did go up, okay, and it became a profitable crop for the farmer because you had competing interests. You had Kellogg's and the cereal companies that wanted to buy corn, and you had the ethanol companies that wanted to buy corn. So there was some competition. But the price of corn today, which a bushel of corn has 56 pounds, of which 18% of it is protein, is still less than a latte at Starbucks. One latte. So I think that's, I don't think that's too high a price. Okay, I think it's found a good price. And it's actually taken subsidies out of the marketplace so that there's no subsidy for corn and there's no subsidy for ethanol. We will talk about the RFS in a second. But there's no straight subsidy from the government for ethanol. Okay, there's no money paid, there's no credits. There hasn't been for 5 years, or at least 5 years. There's been no, there was initially a subsidy. Today, automobiles and transportation is a highly regulated, subsidized market. Today, you can buy a Tesla, okay, get a $6,500 tax credit. You use that tax credit to pay your lease. Guess what? You got almost your first 2 years of your lease paid for, okay? Then you plug your car in. Guess what? You're not paying any road taxes. You're not paying for the highways. You're driving basically for free for the cost of electricity. As soon as you take that tax credit away, guess what's going to happen to Tesla cars? People aren't going to buy them because they don't want to go 150 miles, even if it's only 1 out of 10 times you use a car, and recharge up. So subsidies have been everywhere in this transportation fuel business. Now let's talk about the RFS and what is it, and why does Carl Icahn not like it, and why does the Wall Street Journal not like them? Because the RFS has worked as a monopoly buster. Monopolies are really, really good if you got one, okay? But if you don't have the monopoly, it's not such a good thing. Okay, oil companies have had a monopoly for 100 years on our transportation fuel. And when you say to them, you want to put a cleaner, cheaper fuel into the transportation fuel system, they tell you free markets shouldn't allow it. Go ahead and build your own systems. But within the rules of transportation fuels, there's so many rules, EPA has so many regulations that it's impossible to change our transportation fuels without government activity. Can't do it. Cannot happen. Would never have happened. So they implemented this RFS, which basically said to the fuels companies, you got to take this MTBE out of your fuel as your oxygen, as what raises your octane of your fuel. It's really bad stuff. It's getting in the groundwater. It's really bad. You got to take it out, and you got to replace it with ethanol. Okay, well, obviously the oil companies kicking and screaming, they didn't want to have it happen, you know. And, but it's cleaner, it's better, it's cheaper. For the last 9 years I've been in this business, ethanol's probably averaged 75 cents a gallon less than gasoline in the marketplace. And that has brought an average of somewhere between 12 and $15 billion a year of cheaper fuel to the marketplace. It also, in my opinion, last year in 2016, 300 billion miles were driven on ethanol. 300, that's a B, billion. And I think over the last couple of years, ethanol's had a lot to do with oil going from $100 a barrel to $50 a barrel. I think it's had a lot to do with it. It's not the only thing that's created it. I'm sure fracking has and some other things, but ethanol had a lot to do with it. And so now they have to stay price competitive, because the more they try to take oil back up. It's one of the reasons I don't think oil is going back up above 70 in your lifetimes, because there's too much competition. There's too many other things happening. Electric vehicles are competition, and you know, if we had enough natural gas electricity instead of coal, I mean, it'd be a pretty clean process. I'm a huge fan of natural gas. I'm a huge opponent to coal. I think it's just a giant polluter. So that's really the only subsidy, if you could call it a subsidy, and I call it a monopoly buster. And it's still in place, and it goes to 2022. And it inches up each year in terms of the total volume. And that's just upsetting the oil guys, because they don't want to go any higher than 10%, and now we're at 11, 12%. In Michigan, we have a campaign going in Michigan at our plant and for the Grand Rapids, Lansing, Kalamazoo marketplaces, in which we now have partnered with about 50 gas stations. And we do E85 direct to the gas stations. And we sign a 12-month contract with them. We say, we're going to sell this to you at this price, and you're going to sell it for 80 cents less a gallon than the cheapest gasoline you have at the pump here. So right now, you can buy E85 in Western Michigan for $1.65 a gallon. Okay, you can't do that in Illinois because we don't have the same competitive marketplace that they do in Western Michigan. Ours is what they call a franchise market. The big guys control it. But I pay $3.29 for medium grade here in town. I go up there and I can fill up there for $1.65, $1.70. So competition is working there. It's just not working here as well. I answer that question?
Yeah, so you think that the amount of land that's used to grow corn for ethanol is justified in the benefits it provides against the costs of family farms that go?
That's a different question. So that goes back to part of the work of food versus fuel a little bit, right? That if you grow for ethanol, you can't grow it for food, right? And so the oil company spent close to $100 million in that campaign about 7 years ago, because they really wanted people to think that farmers, if they sold to ethanol plants, that they were starving children of food. Okay, well, first of all, people don't eat corn that we grow for ethanol, but animals do. Okay, and so what our process does is the corn comes into the plant, and we separate the starch from the protein, fiber, and oil. The starch makes up about a little over 60% of the corn kernel, and the fiber, oil, and protein make about a third, a little more than a third of the. We separate it. Okay, and that protein, fiber, and oil goes into an animal feed. That's a really high value animal feed. Okay, and it's a really good animal feed, and we ship that all over the world. Okay, and so think about a container of corn going to Vietnam. And then think about a container, the same size container of our feed going to Vietnam. Our container has 3 times the protein, 3 times the fiber, and 3 times the oil of the container of corn. It has no starch. And the world doesn't need starch. Starch is duplicatable all over the world. You don't need it, okay, for feed. But you do need protein, fiber, and oil. So from that standpoint, the farmers are feeding the world if you believe in meat production as a transfer of protein, which that probably we could have a discussion on that. That's a bit inefficient. But I think with local foods, though, we're trying to encourage local farmers to grow different crops, and I think we're seeing that. There's really a lot of production going on in a lot of crops, but it's still hard for them. The marketplace is not developed enough. People your age have to go to grocery stores and not be overwhelmed by the way produce looks, but actually analyze what it is you're buying. I mean, we're doing some work with, I can't name any of the retail companies, and so I can only say good things about all of them, but a few of them, the produce looks way better than it is, right? So you go out there, we got some goofy looking produce, but it's really good. All right, what's next?
How have a question kind of
Yeah.
related, because you mentioned earlier that there's good profitability with ethanol production, but that doing the local foods related businesses are more challenging
Yes.
to profit at. So what
Yes.
are your recommendations for students here if they want to pursue a food related enterprise, small business development, don't have the benefit of
Yeah.
operating an ethanol plant?
Well, I would
Where do they
say
begin?
Stay out of the restaurant. Stay out of the restaurant business. That's a tough business. We have a lot of restaurants that are our customers, our clients, and that just unless you got some huge passion to work incredibly long hours and not make a lot of money, then you want to stay out of the restaurant industry. I think it's a tough business. As far as food, I think technology is the way to go. I mean, I think if you can understand the science and you can understand the technology for improving how growers grow, there's work there that's being done. There's people that are coming up with really cool things and doing really interesting stuff. I met with some people on Monday, another group in this meeting I was in. They have almost 200,000 acres in South Africa that they grow all kinds of crops. The weather there is spectacular for growing. It's spectacular, and they grow, in addition to doing over 400 million pounds of tomatoes. They grow more in a week and a half than our 15-acre greenhouse grows in a year. They grow avocados and melons, and they're doing berries, and just incredible technology and sophistication of what they're doing. They've been farming for almost 100 years now there as a family. If you can read about technologies that are being introduced into farming and understand those things, that's a potential. I don't recommend farming, and I don't recommend being in restaurants. I think it's a hard business. I think they're difficult. So I think, we're doing the greenhouse. I love being in that business. Hydroponics is different than aquaponics. Don't confuse the two. Hydroponics is sustainable, it is growable, it is manageable. Aquaponics looks good. It's a good story, it's closed loop, it's great, sounds great, it doesn't work. Doesn't work, my opinion.
How productive is your greenhouse in winter, and how does winter affect your business at Local Foods?
They're opposite seasons for both companies. For the greenhouse, it's fantastic. Everybody wants our tomatoes, and they're very expensive. And growing in cold weather with heat is a lot easier than growing in a greenhouse in the summer. We didn't think that when we started. That's something we learned, because it gets too hot. And we haven't figured out how to cool the greenhouse and not add humidity. So most greenhouses that have heat are in deserts where you add humidity, it's not a problem because it's a low humidity environment. But in Illinois, it's high humidity. So we have to, if we're gonna cool, we have to pull humidity out. That's not an easy process. We haven't done that yet. It's an investment we haven't made. We got through this summer pretty good because it wasn't as bad as last summer. But winter time's a great time for us. For Local Foods, it's a little different. This winter will be the first time I think that we actually will offer some non-local produce. Just tell people, have a section, maybe build another section in here and tell people this is non-local, but small farm source, because we just can't get it. We fund farmers to do hoop houses and to extended season extending strategies, which might add a month or two on each side of their season. But when it's heart of the winter, it's really almost impossible to get anything north of Kentucky. Besides our tomatoes, which are grown all year, 12 months a year. Winter production goes down about 10%, collar months here, and then summer production's up about 10%. Obviously, we don't have the lights on in the summer, so our cost of production is quite a bit less in the summer, but so is the price that you sell in the marketplace. That answer the question? Yeah, so it's a tough season for Local Foods on the produce side because we don't have it. Other questions? Yes.
I've marketplace and kind of everything that we've been talking about, you bring it back in that context. And so I'm wondering, it seems like a lot of environmental studies aspects are very anti that, but it's also like the marketplace is very fundamental, obviously, to the world and any change in which that would occur. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that integration and kind of how important it is to understand the realities of the marketplace and the economy before facilitating any change within it.
How important is it to understand how math works? It's pretty important. Math is, you know, I think math is the center point of everything. I mean, it's just the cornerstone of languages and science. So I think the markets, everything, you should bring everything back to the marketplace. You can still help the needy, you can still help the poor, you can still help the less fortunate and do it in the free market economy, okay? And so there's no reason to allow people to make the argument that just because you're pro-market, you're not pro-helping others, okay? You go to a university that the tagline is men and women serving others, right? I think, Jesuit. And when I went to Jesuit school, it was men serving others. We had no girls at Loyola Academy back when I was a kid. But that's always going to be with you. It was always with me, never changed. But I realized you can do more in the marketplace than you can trying to do government-related projects. Did I say that right? I don't want to be critical of those of you who happen to believe in, you know, social policies are going to change the world. You know, they may. They just haven't done it yet. Okay? Marketplaces change the world, and they do it year after year after year. So I would suggest, no matter what you want to go into, understand the marketplace. And then you don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat. You can be your own thing. You don't have to be categorized into one camp or the other. You don't have to be for this side or that side. You let those people talk and argue and disagree and just hang with the marketplace and do your thing. Yes?
How does local foods define sustainable?
It has to be economically sustainable. Let's start with that, from my point of view. Maybe not local food's point of view, but from my point of view. If you build something that it costs you $2 to make and you can only sell it for $1, you're not going to be sustainable. You need to build it for $1 and sell it for $2, then you're going to be sustainable from an economic standpoint. But in the example of the fish example, okay, sometimes you'll read that a fish is sustainably grown, okay, and the question becomes, what does that mean? And I will tell you that often it is probably the most misrepresented statement you could possibly have, especially in food. And you have to dive into it. Is it sustainable to have fish in pens by the millions right outside the estuary where the fish used to come in to go spawn up the river? And they build these giant pens now, and the fish can't even come into the estuaries. So I heard this fisherman from Alaska say, you know, those pens are destroying the ocean fish population. I said, well, why is that? They're not fishing as much. They got all the fish in the pen. He goes, no, the ocean fish can't get into the estuaries where they built the pens, and they can't spawn, and you don't have any more ocean fish. So what is sustainable? I would say that fishing in pens is not sustainable. But then I heard about a project outside of Barcelona where they do tuna in giant nets. So they go out and they capture all these tuna in this giant net. And if the tuna is under 200 pounds, it escapes out of the net. And if it's over 200 pounds, it doesn't get out of the net. And then the divers go down and they kill one tuna at a time. And I wonder, is that sustainable? Might be sustainable. You know, and they put the tuna in the water to begin with when they were about this big. Okay, that might be sustainable. Is it sustainable to have fish in tanks? I happen to think it is. And I think we can control the waste product of the fish much better than in the nets, because it's the waste product that's destroying the estuary and keeping the other fish out. When you have millions of fish in the mouth of a giant river, and you have all this fish waste going down. It's like the dirtiest water on the planet. So if we have them in giant tanks and the waste falls at the bottom and we collect it, guess what that is? That's organic fertilizer. And we use that on the fields right outside Rochelle. We use that right on the fields. So I think that's sustainable. I think examples are better than actually giving you a definition, because I think it's, in food I've noticed there aren't many companies that actually do what they say they're doing. There's a lot of not so good practices. I would say about one company, I don't know yet with them being bought, but Whole Foods walked the walk. They used to have they had pretty good processes and systems and supported a lot of entrepreneurial farmers with their products. We probably at Mighty Vine would have never been able to get started if Whole Foods hadn't helped us out from day one and bought our tomatoes. I hope Amazon continues the same philosophy. I'm looking at the camera now. I really hope they do.